action. Hello, today we're going to plant some Allium bulbs. Very simple to do. I've got myself some Allium bulbs. I've actually got about 100 Allium bulbs that I got on a late deal. I've got myself a good container that's nice and deep, because bear in mind I want to plant this 3 times its depth down. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's where it's going. So you need to make sure that you've got at least, I would say, 1 inch or so underneath for the roots when you're planting an Allium bulb. Deeper the better, really. Lots of drainage, and I'm not going to bother to cover the holes there, even though there's quite a lot and they're quite big, because I'm using quite a fibrous compost. So this is a peat-free multi-purpose compost, but it's very fibrous, very woody. You could use bulb fibre, which is great, but it is a bit more expensive than multi-purpose, so this is the most economical route. And I'm going to fill that up to that line that was 3 deep there, but you can just measure yourself down, and you can always, my top tip is, if you've got a permanent marker like a Sharpie, you can always, on the inside of your pot, just make a little cross of where you want your soil level, like I've done there. Here we are in the potting deck, and if I want to just firm this down a bit, I could use my hand just gently, or just like that, and that will probably firm it to about right. And as you can see, it's about where I wanted it with the mark, so it's perfect. This is Allium Purple Sensation, which is a fab one. So I've sorted through, and I've got a handful of good ones here, and I've sorted out all the janky, rotting, spongy ones which are no good. Because I got these late, very late, some of them are going to be no good at all. And what I'm doing is I'm just placing them in, and I'm looking for pointy end to be up. That's where the leaves will come through. The roots, quite often you'll see roots on Alliums, which is quite handy. They're the fibrous things on the bottom. They're usually on a bit of a flat plate, so that will obviously go on the bottom there. Sometimes it's difficult to tell with a few of misshapen Alliums, but you know, that one there doesn't really look pointy, but luckily it's got that flat plate and that root on the bottom that allows me to see what it is. So before I put my mesh in, I'm just going to put a layer of compost. And because I want the option of overplanting these, I need to make sure that my mesh is at a decent depth. So I want to make sure that it's not touching the bulbs, but again, it's not going to touch the roots immediately if I decide to plant in something above. Now put my mesh in. This mesh has much larger holes than I would like. Normally I want them quite small, but this is just what I happen to have. So all I make sure is when I put this on is that I'm overlapping it, making sure it gets into the corners, so that it sort of creates smaller holes anyway. And this is, like I say, just to deter squirrels, so I'm not too worried about other rodent problems. Now I'm just going to fill up to just short of the top. And you can see I'm just firming down just very gently as I go, to make sure that those bulbs are going to be in contact with the soil. And that should be perfect. Okay, I don't need to water it in because this is moist compost, but if it was dry compost and I hadn't pre-watered it, you would of course water it in. All I've done now, just on the label I'm reusing, is put the name Allium Purple Sensation is what this one is, and I'm just going to slide it in to the side there, and that's why I've used a permanent marker to write the label. Is hopefully, even though it's on the soil level there, I'll be able to read it. I don't like looking at ugly labels, so I like to tuck them just in the edge there, and then if anyone asks or I need to remind myself what variety that is, I can just pull it up and check. And that's how you pot up allium bulbs. Now I want to plant all my allium bulbs into pots, but I'm going to show you the method as if you were planting them in the ground or an existing pot which had other things in there. That's a nice looking pot, isn't it? And that blue should play well off the off some of these alliums. So what I'm going to do is fill this with compost. So I've got some bulbs here. These are Allium Christophii. I've filtered out all the spongy ones. Yeah, that's just got a little bit of rubbish on it, but that's okay. And now I'm going to plant these in here. With bulbs, normally a rule of thumb with them is that you plant essentially a bulb width between them. Okay, so that works quite well, and that will work in here. As you can see, by the time I've planted these up, it's going to be about right. Now one way I could do it is to use a proper bulb planter. So this is a bulb planter. They come in different sort of guises, and you can get ones which are on a long handle, etc. Some which open and some which don't. This is an opening one. And what you can do is you can press down to the depth that you know you want to plant it, and quite often they've got a depth measure on there. Now if I want to plant 1, 2, 3, that's going to be just above the 4-inch mark there. It's probably more 5 inches. So again, when you're buying a bulb planter, you want to think, if I'm having to plant 6 inches deep and the bulb planter only goes to 4, it's not a lot of good. Also, these only work with certain types of soil. But let's press down. So you press down like that. You would take a core out. See the core's in there. You would put your bulb in, pointy end up, roots on the bottom. Place that at the bottom of the hole, and then with these ones, they're great because you can just release it. Otherwise you would have to use something to push the soil back in, but you just release it like that and it fills it back up. Now quite often what's the danger with using these is you end up about an inch or so lower than where you were, because it has a natural action of compacting the soil, particularly if you've got a very friable loose compost. And let's try and dig that one out. So we'll start again. If I was planting a smaller bulb, you see these little ones here, I'd be tempted to use my transplanting trowel there, because I'd go, right, that is about quarter or half an inch, so it wants to go about 1.5 inches deep. I'd make my little hole, and then I could drop it in and then just firm over. Okay, likewise with these bigger ones, I often think that a trowel like this is better, a nice open trowel. It goes into the ground or the compost. You're just pushing to a side, so if I rotate that, you can see pushing to a side. Sometimes you can go like that if you need the room, and then you're just making sure that you go down to the right depth. Now this one's rather handy because it's got up to 4-inch measurement there, and I know that 6 inches at the top of that, and I know that I want to be 3 deep. It's 1 inch, 1, 2, 3, so somewhere between 3 and 4 deep. That's where I'm planting, and then just cover it over, just firm gently. That's it planted. And that's how I'm going to plant all these ones here. Okay, just make sure that they are pointy end up. The most difficult thing when you're using this method is actually trying to remember the bulb you've just planted, or previous bulbs you've just planted, where exactly they are, so you're not slicing or digging up or overcrowding your bulbs. I do find it more difficult doing this method, and also as your trowel gets muddier, it's actually judging the depth again. Also, you'll find that your depth of compost keeps changing. So sometimes it's easier when you're using this measure to take your measure off the line of the pot. So what I've been doing is going, right, I want about 3.5, 4 off the top of the pot, because then I know that with this lower compost level, that's about where it is. One there. And also, it starts getting quite tricky when you get to the last few, and in fact, because this is quite tightly planted, I'm going to use my little transplanting trowel and make the correct hole. There we go, that's going in. So you might be able to see it down there, and I'm just covering it over. And then I've got one more to squeeze in here. What I could use as well is I could use a dibber like this. This is quite good also, and this just goes deep enough. This is, again, is 4 inches. So if I go there, I have to remember it's the 4 inches off the top of my pot. There we go. And you're just going to make sure that it's wide enough to get that down there. And there we go. So that's the planting in method that you would use for a plant bed, or you would use for a pot that had existing planting in. You can see here I'm actually topping up my compost level again a little bit, because it's sort of fluffed out everywhere and compacted as I was planting the bulbs. Thing of beauty. Now all I've got to do is label it. There's my label, Allium Christophii. And like my other pot that I did, I just like sliding them in the side there. So I can't really see them, but I can pull them out if I need them. That's it there. Obviously the disadvantage planting down into a pot is you can't use the mesh like I used before. So you can't like bury the mesh in there. You would have to put a mesh over the top. But I think it's a good experiment with this one, just to see. This is going out the front where we don't normally have a squirrel problem. So hopefully it will survive. Cut.